Hello, everyone. My name is Cassandra Allen. I'm with the Health Council of West Central Florida. This is the recording for the user manual of the Food Security Map, brought to you by the Food Security Council in Polk County, an initiative of Polk Vision through the assistance of the Health Council. I will now pass it on to Anthony Oliveri, our mapping expert.
And thank you, Cassandra, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to give an overview of a mapping tool developed for mapping Polk County's food security. This is a tool that is designed to be used by nonprofits and decision makers. It's not particularly designed for the general public, but it is designed so you convey information to the general public. So let me go over why we actually map. So I'm going to give an overview, and I'm going to go into these basic functions of this web app, and then I'll demonstrate them. So why do we have to use, or should use, mapping for food security? Well, perspective is the main reason. Maps allow you to give multiple perspectives of your assets. In this case, food security assets, feeding organizations, schools, supermarkets are some examples of assets. And it gives you an idea of their proximity to each other. So if we're looking at a feeding organization such as a pantry, we can see it in proximity to a supermarket. And we also can see in proximity to maybe a farmer's market or even a community garden. And we can see that in context of an area that has a metric for food insecurity, such as social vulnerability or diabetes or obesity. And by understanding the proximity of things, we could better plan. And we also could target our resources to where there is highest need or where there are gaps. And most importantly, food security is a collaborative effort. It's a collaborative effort across different sectors, across the child response sector, to the county and municipal planning sectors, to various nonprofits. And in all these sectors, by using a map, you have a common measure, a common vision, and you can create a common data-driven story and plan. So in summary, basically maps offer the ability for a common perspective at multiple scales to solve the problem of food security in this case. So the mapping tool I'm going to show you is actually comprises of two tools that emerge. One is this basic web-based map. The base map provides all the layers that you will see in the tool I'm about to show you. It supplies the ability to add, change, and delete the map layers, to fix the order of these layers, such as layers. What I mean by layers, like farmers markets, a layer here, schools are a layer. That you can actually add these, delete them, or change the order of them. And you could add fields to their features. So if we have a school that has, or farmers market that has an address, when you change the address is an attribute. We could do that very effectively in the map, and we can perform complex analysis. However, the training is not on the base map. This is reserved more for internal operations for Polk County GIS or whoever's going to host the map. For users, for those who work in the nonprofit sector, the child response sector, or the planning sector, we have the map app. Basically, it's the base map, but with some widgets. And widgets are functionality tools to help you manipulate and navigate the data in the base map. So widgets offer the ability to filter, edit, select, and export the layer data. You could customize and print a map. You could change the order layer transparency. You just cannot add new layers to the app like you can with the map. But we designed it with player layers, so you have lots to start with, and we'll go over those shortly. So here are the map layers. We have 20 of them. So here are the 20 layers. We have the county boundary, of course, and these layers are point layers. Come up here. We have the supermarkets, we have farmers markets, schools, and then we have contextual layers. And contextual layers are by the census tract or the neighborhood level, such as the social vulnerability index, which I'll get into. We also have tract level heart disease for adults, obesity, diabetes. We also have measures for poverty as well. And we also have a food environment layer which is at the track level of SNAP authorized retailers per 10,000 population by track. So these layers, you can use in various combinations to create your own map, do analysis, and create planning and programming opportunities that address food security in Polk County. So to see these layers, they have to be checked. So the ones that are checked, these are the blue check marks. These are the ones that are activated. These are the ones that pop up when we first open the app, which I'll show you a little bit. I want to explain a little bit more about these layers and the data behind them. So let's talk about the contextual layers, the social vulnerability index. It's quite a mouthful. I'll call it the SVI from this point on. The SVI, the social vulnerability index, comprises of 4 themes: socioeconomic status, household composition and disability, minority status and language, housing and transportation. Each of these themes are comprised of a subset of US Census measures. So for socioeconomic status, it's a score of 0 to 1 for below poverty, unemployment, income, and no high school diploma, where 1 is the most vulnerable, 0 is the least vulnerable. And we have 15 of these census tract measures, which are incorporated into each of these themes. So these green items are incorporated into socioeconomic status. These orange items are incorporated into the household composition status. These 2 items are incorporated into minority status and language. If you were to map all these, it would get very cumbersome. If you had to map poverty and unemployment and minority status, and you wanted to map mobile homes, those who live in mobile homes, if you want to do it in one map, it would get very messy very quickly. The SVI solves that problem by creating an overall score of 0 to 1 that incorporates vulnerability across all these themes. So this allows you to understand if you have a high social vulnerability census tract, you know that it's incorporating several themes, and some themes, that score may be driven by one or more of the themes. I just want to show you that this is a powerful tool to understand social vulnerability, because social vulnerability index is used for disaster planning, for even COVID planning, and of course, for emergency responses, such as emergency food responses. Those who are the most socially vulnerable also are consistently shown to have poorer health outcomes. So if you have your socioeconomic status is highly vulnerable, you're less likely to be able to afford nutritious food. You have to make decisions between food and rent. So this is also a measure of those who are more likely to be food insecure. And we know that food insecurity also is linked to dietary outcomes. So another contextual layer are these, we have a few dietary health contextual layers, which are also in the census tract level or the neighborhood level. So here we have obesity as an example. And these rates here are a percentage of adult obesity. So in red, we're focusing on Winter Haven. Down by Eagle Lake, for example, the rates for obesity can range between 36.9 or almost 37% to almost to 50% when you round it up. So this is divided in quintiles. So 20% the lowest data, 20% the highest data. So in the red and orange is the top 40% at the highest rate of obesity. And we'll see in a little bit when we go between social vulnerability and obesity, or social vulnerability and diabetes, that the areas that are red for social vulnerability, they tend to also be red for these dietary outcomes. So it helps us understand the relationship between social vulnerability, dietary health outcomes, which we know is directly related to food insecurity. This data set, like the SVI, is from the CDC, and particularly the SALT data set is from the Places data set. And we are only using a few measures, but there are 27 measures of chronic diseases that can be accessed from the CDC. So you could use the initial data set to do some analysis, but you can enrich your analysis by going to the CDC website and acquiring more data. So if you want to get more data on sleep habits, which is a good indicator for health, for stress and health, also dental health, physical and mental health, you can get this from the Places data. In addition to these contextual layers, these neighborhood level track layers, what sits on top of that are our site layers. These are the point locations where we can affect policies and systems change. So you could think about the contextual layers is where we can do environmental changes, but the site layers is where we actually do program, systems, and policy changes. So for example, our feeder organizations, we have 55 of them. And add each organization, we have 34 attributes. I mentioned attributes before, and there's something called attribute table we'll get into a little bit. But these 34 attributes are simply points of information, of 34 slots of information for each of the 55 organizations. So 55 times 34, you can do some math and you can see how much data there is just for this one data set. What's important here is that for the feeder organizations, we have done great work on noting which ones have certain types of infrastructure, whether they have a kitchen, in this case, this one does not, it's 0. Refrigeration, this one reports it has refrigeration, so this is the Lakeland Volunteers in Medicine. A pallet jack, lift gate, forklift. If there's a 1, it means it has that type of infrastructure. We don't have data on the warehouse square footage at this time, or any or data if it has cold storage. I think this one is 0 for cold storage, but it does have a refrigerator. So we don't have the square footage for these things. So this is something we can edit later on. So to show you that there are 34 points of information across these 55 organizations, this is data that will need to be updated because this is data that could change. Organizations could increase their square footage. They could acquire refrigeration. They could lose the ability to have a pallet jack. So this is data that we need to edit once in a while, and the smart editor, which is a widget that we'll go over in part 2, gives you the ability to do that. And they are scaled. When you see them on the map, they're scaled by the average distance traveled. So this is the distance they, on average, they travel to deliver services. So just to show you that the map gives some idea of the size of operations for these organizations. So in a minute or two, I'm going to go over a demonstration of these basic web map functions. I just want to show you where these things are, and then we'll actually go into it. So most basic thing you have on a map is a legend. So this legend and layer view allows you to toggle between the legend and the layer views. Right now we're on layer view. You can see the layers. This is blue check mark and social vulnerability index. That means the blue check mark means it's active, and that's what you see in the background is the social vulnerability index. And you can change its transparency. You also could change its order, which we'll go over in a little bit. So you can do a lot here with the layer view. You can change the look of the items, of the layers, and you can change the order. And in the map area itself, you have some basic functions as well. You could change the space map. So right now it's a grayscale map. You could change to a street view. That's typical like Google Maps street view or satellite view. You also go zoom to an address. If you have a particular address you want to go to, you can quickly zoom to the address. And when you find a location, you can click on it and you get this pop-up information about it. So here we clicked on this Publix, we get its address, we get zip code, we get the ID number for it. And then we can also go view this information in the attribute table. So all those attributes I mentioned, we can look at it in a little spreadsheet. And of course, we could zoom if we click on this Publix, so we want to zoom to it, we click on zoom to, we'll get up almost to the street level of the site. And we could change our view to a satellite view and see the actual streets and trees and roads. So this is gives you an overview of the basic functions in the app without going into it too deeply. The more complicated part of these basic functions is the attribute table. But I just want to dispel any fear, but maybe I'm going to cause more fear. A map is simply a spreadsheet that gives the data over geographic space. So behind the map, so we have in here, we have our feeder organizations listed here on the feeder organization tab. So think about this as a spreadsheet. And this attribute table or spreadsheet, it can be activated by clicking on the little gray and black triangle at the bottom of the map, which I'll show in a little bit. And when it pops up, you could see whatever you see on the map, you also see the spreadsheet view. This becomes useful because I mentioned before we have 34 attributes for just one of our feeding organizations. You could scroll back and forth in the attribute table, see those attributes very clearly. And if you want to toggle to the schools or the farmers markets or supermarkets, you could quickly toggle between these different features you see in the map. Instead of clicking on each one and looking, you could use this quickly to zoom back and forth and compare information in your field of vision. And I'll show you some other options too. You can export the information if you need to, which I'll go into a little bit. So speaking of which, I'm going to go into a demonstration. These are the basic web app functions I went over. And I go now cancel get out of this screen and switch over to the web app. So let me refresh the web app and show you how it opens. You usually get these little bars that click, and sometimes it could take a minute. So this one opened quite quickly, which is great. Sometimes on Zoom, it could go open slowly. But I just want to show you, this will pop up right away. This is about this app. It explains the app. And there's also links to Social Vulnerability Index, we want to learn more, and to the census measure called Community Resilience Risk Factors, very similar to SBI. It's a layer that's also available. You can click on that. But it gives you just a basic overview. It does take up a lot of space, and you get rid of it by clicking on this. So let me just go over to the basic functions that we mentioned earlier, the layer and the layer view and legend view. Right now, the map opens to the legend view. So what we're looking at, we have the Polk County boundary, which is outside our field of vision. It's there if we zoom out. We can see supermarkets and feed organizations and the Social Vulnerability Index. And we can see that where there's red, that's the highest social vulnerability. And where there's dark green, that's the lowest social vulnerability. And we can start to see now that we have a pattern where we can see that where the feeding organizations tend to be in the red areas. So automatically we can start to see that they tend to be either in the red area or near the red areas. There's a few of them that are out in the green areas where low social vulnerability, but mostly they are in the areas of high social vulnerability, as we would expect them to be so. Another way of looking at this is the layer list. So we can click on the stack of books and we'll switch to the layer list. So these items that are blue, these 4 items, the boundary, I can shut the boundary actually, because we don't look at it. The supermarkets, feed organizations, social vulnerability, those are in the legend view. So I click back to legend, you can see that the Polk County boundary is no longer there, part of the legend. And we can click various things and add them. So say if I want to add farmers markets, and I wanted CSAs, I wanted schools. See the CSA popped up right here, it's a little CSA. And I wanted schools can pop up. If I go back to my legend gets populated with those items. But there is such thing as too much. So maps could get very busy. As you can see, it already starts to get very busy with adding all these colors. We have every color in the rainbow on this map already, and it could get overwhelming with information. So what I like to do with maps, I like to focus. I think maps are a really good focusing tool to focus on a particular problem. And let's just stick with something simple. Let's just shut off schools for a little bit. We can shut this off. And let's just look at the feeding organizations and social vulnerability. I'm going to shut off these supermarkets. So we'll just look at feeding organizations and social vulnerability. And so let's look at it this way. We can change the social vulnerability index by changing transparency. So if I can make it more red, but make it less opaque, and that way we can see where the high social vulnerability areas are, we can see it more clearly. Or if I'm focusing on areas, say if I'm in this area right here, let's see how I could zoom in by going in and out. I know this area that's in my field of vision has high social vulnerability. So basically everything in this area I can see in the center of my screen is high social vulnerability. I might not want all that red anymore. I could change opacity to more transparent and see what happens. I could start to see the streets. I can start to see the streets when I do that. I can zoom in. You almost see the footprints of buildings when you do that as well. You start to go in there. Another reason why you might want to do transparency, we go back to the 50%, is that you might want to understand the relationship between different layers. So I mentioned before that we wanted to understand the relationship between social vulnerability and maybe a health outcome, such as obesity. When I click on obesity, let me shut off social vulnerability. I click on obesity, it's almost like the same map. So this is obesity, this is social vulnerability. This is obesity on top of social vulnerability. So let me leave both layers on and show how to use transparency to show the relationship. So I'm going to change transparency to social vulnerability, SVI. So right now, this is only social vulnerability. It's all that dark red, just social vulnerability. As I fade out, I just have obesity. You can see by toggling quickly, you can see that the areas of high social vulnerability tend to also be the areas of high obesity. You can see it's not always 1-for-1, but it's pretty close. And the reason why this is the case is because the data is all the data sets on the same scale, and they are on the same, they're stratified the same way. So if I go back to my legend, I can see overall social vulnerability and obesity. We're using the same color ramp. We're dividing the data by quintile or 20% data slices. So this is the top 20%. This is the bottom 20% of the data. And by changing transparency, we can quickly see relationships. So that's why transparency is good to change your view. It's also good to help you understand relationships between different layers, particularly the contextual layers, because we could do this with also heart disease. So I could turn on heart disease. And you can see when I do transparency for social vulnerability, this is high, there's always social vulnerability. And as I go further, I get heart disease. Heart disease has a little different composition. So here is high social vulnerability, low social vulnerability. Keep your eye over here. But now we can see this is high heart disease and moderate social vulnerability, but they are next to each other. So when things are next to each other, and mapping, when things, there's an axiom where things that are closer together are more alike, things that are further apart are more unalike. So here we have two census tracts, a social vulnerability track and a SVI track layered on top of each other. They're close to each other, but they have very similar values to each other. So we also could change the order of things too, if we need to. So you may have a situation where let's turn schools on, for example. So I'm gonna turn off the heart disease, and I'm gonna leave social vulnerability index. Let's see, I have the transparency. I'm gonna leave it all the way at 100% transparent. So it's there, you just can't see it. And let me show you how I could change the order of some of these features. So say we have schools, and we have these schools, and we want to look at the schools primarily on top of everything else. So we could take the schools and we can move them by moving them up. And by moving them up, we could put them at the very top of our data set. And that allows us to look at these data sets just together. And I also can move my my social vulnerability index further up too. But the idea is that if you have a lot of point layers, such as schools, and they are sitting underneath another point layer, you can move them up so they don't get buried. So if you have a situation where the school is buried by a feeding organization, you can put the school on top of the feeding organization. So it gives you another way of looking at the data and changing the order of them. And so I've showed how you could use this layer list and see where that is. The schools are now here at the top. We moved them, so they're now on top of feeding organizations. So we could change when we change the order in the layer list. We go back to our legend, and we can see that it actually changed the order. And you can see also too that social vulnerability index is there, but because I changed the transparency, you don't visually see it, so I could turn it back on. So here we go. We could change transparency, and I can put it back to like 50% if I want, or make it just a little lighter like that. So we also can, with this view, this basic view, we change the order and transparency. We also could zoom. So for example, let's zoom into this area. We have a lot of features. We have some schools, we have some feeding organizations, and as we zoom in, we start to see some detail to the streets. And let's go back to the social vulnerability and change transparency again to make it more transparent. And see if we want to look a little closely at this, and we want to see the actual information behind it. One way we could do is we click on the actual site. So here I clicked on the St. Albans pantry shelf. I can scroll down, and I can see all the features. I can see all the 34 attributes in this layer set. Or say if I was out here like this, I go, oh, there is this organization here. I want to take a closer look at it. I can go zoom to, and zooming right to it. And I want to look more into like, okay, what's around that area, right? In the grayscale, you don't see much. It's kind of fuzzy gray. It's meant to be like a canvas. I could go to this base map, and I could change it to a street view, much like a Google Street View. And now I start to see a little more detail. I actually see the building. I see the streets very clearly. I can see the park. I can see this water features, there's lakes. But I say, you know, I want to see if there's a little more information. I could change it to the satellite view, and I can actually see the building. And you can even see the palm trees. So you can start to see a relationship between different features. You can see where the school is down here. And now you can see that there's an issue. The school is now a little blue. It's not, you can't see it as well. So I could go back to this gray view, and I could see, okay, here they are in relationship to each other. And I could go back to my satellite view. This may be important too, because if you're planning events or planning outreach events or planning food distribution events, you might want to see what's around there. You also might want to see, and you could even, what assets are there and activate them. So if you say if you're doing an outreach event, you could activate, say, Albans Pantry Shelf, the Orange Street Church of Christ, and possibly this school, and you could create an event at a nearby park if you wanted to. So you have a park over here, and these three organizations that are pretty close to each other. You can see the scale down here. 600 feet is this, so it's approximately 600 feet. 1,200 feet from each other. You can actually coordinate collaboration between these organizations for a special event at the city park. It's just a scenario. Let me go back to gray view. That way you can see the three of them here. So another way you could do this too is you could look at the information behind these organizations. So I have these three organizations. Remember the attribute table I mentioned earlier? Let me make the legend here. So legend is turned on. So I click on, let me move this up a little bit, zoom out. I can click on my attribute table, and let me click on my feeder organizations. And I can see these organizations when I click on them. So I click on this one, it lights up. Orange Street Church, it's lit up a little like gray over here. The school, when I click on the school, I have to go to school. That's clicked right here. So the attribute table is only going to show you which your field of vision, and you can see all the attributes. So for school, we don't have a lot of attributes, but let's go back to feeder organizations. So say if we have these feeder organizations in our field of view, these are our feeder organizations, which are an attribute table, and we want to know how many of them have refrigeration. Let's see. So we can scroll over here, add these organizations. We have here the three organizations, so three there. I go to refrigeration, get statistics. And so out of the three have refrigeration. So let me zoom out a little more. I have now 6 features in my field of vision. What's the statistics on that? So 6 out of 6 have refrigeration. Let's see, let's pick something a little more like square footage. What's the warehouse square footage for these? So there are 6 features. So there's basically 2,400 square footage, an average of 400 square feet between the organizations that we have here. So this is how we could use the attribute table. By using our field of vision, an attribute table, we could quickly get statistics about what's in the map. You could go through each one and click on it and copy and paste information, because this one is 0 square footage. And you could click over this one and get that one also 0. Let's see who has the most in here. Square footage is 0 here. Someone here has a lot of square footage. And let's see who does. Let's see. Let me go over to square footage for warehouse square footage. Let me try to check this again. Statistics. Actually, I used the wrong field. I was looking at, must have looked at something else. So out of the 4, 0 of them, no one has square footage for warehouse square footage. So I chose one. I must have chose a different field. Maybe I chose something correct. But so loading docks, how many have loading docks? Out of the 4 of them have loading docks. So by scrolling out further, I could get this information for this area. So let's see square footage. So it's warehouse square footage. So it says average. Let me check here. There's maybe an error. So there's 21 features. Now let's see which one here is driving that. So this one here is 10,000 square feet. And let's find out which one that is. I double click on it. Education empowerment supposedly has, if it's not an error, has 10,000 square feet of footage. So you see what I did was I zoomed out. I did a quick calculation of the assets for basically the feeding organization assets. I saw there's a lot of square footage for some of them or one of them. And indeed, this one here has the square footage that was in that field of vision that we could not see apparently, but by using the attribute table and scrolling down, I was able to quickly find it. So that's what was driving the square footage for those. And so I could scroll down here and go all the way out. And I could now start to see, me refresh the filter by map extent. And I could scroll down and see, actually I could sort it. Let's sort it by descending, greatest to least. So this one is 2,000, 2,400. So I could quickly zoom out and start to descend and see who has the most, the least. So this one has 20,000. Who has 20,000 square feet? I zoom to it. It is this site, volunteers and service, the elderly. So, and what makes you think is that I wonder if I should scale the organizations by their square footage of warehouse rather than distance traveled. So we could change it. But this is how you could use the attribute table to start to explore your data. Because if you have 55 feeding organizations and you have 90-something schools, and this data could compound very quickly, and you want to know the statistics behind these things because you're planning events, you want to know who has the square footage, who has refrigeration, you could start to do this by using the attribute table to do this. So let's do a scenario where we want to find a location. We want to find something in a certain zip code. So say the zip code right here. We want to find everything in the zip code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out. I zoomed out to Florida, and I said, you know what? I just have a zip code. I have a zip code of interest. We want to do a lot of organizing the zip code. You can paste that zip code in here, and it will zoom to that zip code. So that's what it's done now. It's zoomed that particular zip code. So everything in this area is that zip code. And so this is one way, or you can put an address in there if you want. So it gives you various options. So I can put right here. You have Parker Street. You have downtown Lakeland if you want. You can zoom into there. You can use a zip code. You can use an address to start to hone in on an area of interest. So I think, for example, Mirror Lake, Lake Mirror. Let's see if that would work. That's in there. Lake Mirror. Okay, so let me zoom out. And let me get away from Lake Mirror. So Lake Mirror, and zoom in. Yep, and I can zoom in. So zoom in to it. Yep, and I can zoom into Lake Mirror. So this, just to show you that this finding ability, the ability to zoom in with addresses is pretty flexible. You could use zip codes, you could use names of places. And a reminder, this is only Polk County. So you could put in Broward County and you're not going to get these features. So all this data is just for Polk County. So say we found a location of interest and we done a calculation, we determined, this is of interest to us. We determined that we want to work with some schools and feeding organizations. And let's turn on our social vulnerability index again. And so let's change the transparency to like in the 70% range. Let's go back to our layer. So say we want to work in this particular census tract that has high social vulnerability, and we know it's high, and we could click on this area, this track, and see the high social vulnerability. So let's click on it. And this particular track, what's glowing here in light blue is the track. Its overall social vulnerability is 1. That's the highest social vulnerability we would get. Very, very high social vulnerability. This area is the most need. And we can look at the various breakdown of the themes. So it's social vulnerability for socioeconomic status is extremely high. It's almost 1.97. Same thing, household composition. Minority status is very high as well. So this is probably the most vulnerable track we could probably work with in this area. Next door, we could see that the social vulnerability index for this is 0.76. The socioeconomic status is quite high, but it's not high in minority status and language. So this and not high in housing type. So this would tell me that while this track, let me clear this right here. While this track has high social vulnerability across the board, track next door doesn't have as much social vulnerability in the same areas. It doesn't have high social vulnerability in theme 4 housing transportation. So this area, probably people have their own cars. They probably don't live in mobile homes or don't have crowded housing. And let me skip out this. All right. So this to show you that you can use the pop-up feature to understand the differences between census tracts, or you could use the attribute table and go to that layer and see it that way too. So I could scroll all the way to social vulnerability, and actually it should be in order. Let me go this direction and this direction. The social vulnerability should be, go further, maybe all the way at the end. Oh, here it is. And so now we can start to see the themes for the various tracks that are in our field of vision. So this is another way of looking at the data. However, when you get to the spreadsheet view, the variables are not spelled out to you like they are on the pop-up. So this RPL themes 3 is theme 3 here, which is minority status and language. So it's not as transparent as the pop-up. But just understand that 1, 2, 3 corresponds to those themes. But to show you could use your attribute table or you use a pop-up. But let me get back to this project here. We focus in on an area of high social vulnerability. Now, it's an area of high need. We want to work with organizations in this track. We want to work with the schools. We want to work with these feeding organizations. And maybe want to work with some supermarkets too, if there are any. So there's one supermarket in the area down here. There's 2, but there's not many in here, which just speaks to the issue that this area, let's see if it has, actually, let's look at its diabetes. They might have high diabetes. So let's turn on diabetes. And unsurprisingly, it has high social vulnerability. It also has high diabetes. So the population is basically almost 22% has diabetes, the adult population. So we look at a scale here that is in the highest ranking category for diabetes. So this particular census tract we know has high diabetes, this track 136, is high diabetes and high social vulnerability. This is an area that would need collaborative efforts to address the food insecurity. And we can do this by getting the data. So we have the contact information between these organizations. We call them up. We could start organizing. We have email information. We know what kind of infrastructure they have. We know which schools are there. And we can actually print a map and share it with them. So we go over here to another widget. These widgets are, we'll go to these part 2, but we can print a map by clicking print. It will print, it should print what we have in this view. And the printing widget does take a little bit of time sometimes. So let's pick a portrait style map. And we could, and the default is to do it as a JPEG. This way you can, let's see if there's any advanced features. Map extent, let's preserve the map extent. By preserving the map extent means that we're preserving what we see and we could print. Now, hopefully this won't take long. We are in Zoom, but when it's doing create and print, it's now created hopefully a printed image of this area of interest. And this allows you to, you could put this in a PowerPoint or a report. You could create a map and say, we have these organizations. This is their infrastructure they have. They have this many pallet jacks. They have this much square footage for storage. We have these schools that could collaborate. And let's see what this looks like. So we click on it, oh, security. Yes, and we have it. So now we have, let me zoom in a little bit. We have a map. And you could, because this is an image, you could change the title in PowerPoint if you want. But the important part here is that we have a map to scale. You know how many miles and kilometers to scale this is. And we have our features. We have our adult diabetes, and we have our schools and our feeding organizations. And it's timestamped. But you could take this in PowerPoint and you could dress it up with more if you want. You could just cut the crop, the legend out and put it off to the side. And you want to zoom in a little further over here, you could do that. But the point is that what we've done is we are able to do analysis between the pop-ups and our attribute tables and get that data. And we can zoom in and target an area based off its vulnerability. And it's on health, in this case, vulnerability and health outcome. We use transparency to do that. And we could export a map to show an area of interest. So I did start to dip myself into a little bit of a widget. I went to the printer widget a little bit. And in part 2, we go over all these widgets. There are various widgets that I'll go into. There's a widget that tells you how much of your data you have there. So we have all our point data here. It tells we have 5 feeding organizations in this area, 2 supermarkets, 3 schools. And we have the ability to filter this information. And we have the ability to share the map if we want. And we have the ability to select and export the data. So, one final thing too, you also can export your data using the attribute table. So say if you are here and you're feeding organizations and you want to export the information, you can export the information, what you see in the map, you can export it as an Excel file. And let's see how this works out. And it will open up the Excel file of the data you see. Actually, it's exporting all the data. So I haven't gotten to a selection, but so it exported all the 50-something feeding organizations. But you can do, as I'll show later on, is that you can select which ones you want and just export those. So that's a different story for part 2. So anyway, this concludes part 1, which is going over the basic functions of the layer list, the attribute table, of our legend and our layer list, and the attribute table, and the ability to change the base map, and to zoom in and out, to see pop-up information behind various data sets, and to use that pop-up information in combination with the attribute table to get statistics about data that you're viewing. And you can do this to coordinate your planning efforts for food security for better and more food security in Polk County.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I just want to remind everyone watching this that the more you interact with the map, the easier it gets. Definitely use the tools here in this video to play with the map, learn about more. And as Anthony said, in part 2, we'll be going over some additional widgets that make it pretty easy to navigate the map. This concludes part 1.
Thank you, and I'll stop recording.